If there is a bell, no, it's just that. Oh yeah, the gas. Okay.
Wherever you stand in your speaker's chair, please. Okay. Hello, welcome to the next motion, which is 2 seconds. Thank you. Well done. But yeah, welcome to tonight's motion. This house believes the freedom of the press is made clear to the public. Probably should have written that down. A few announcements quickly. We have the Christmas dinner. It's on the 1st of December and it is going to be held in Kitch. It's £25 to get a 3-course meal. There'll be drinks in here before. So if you are interested in going, Owen has a spreadsheet. Owen has a spreadsheet. Just sign up and he'll sort that out. Secondly, we have the Cork ID, which is next weekend, the 27th, 28th, which is a novice competition. So it doesn't matter if you have any experience or you don't have any experience of inter-varsity competitions.
The deadline is passed for that.
The deadline is actually passed. So, just for reference, there will be a Cork IB. We won't be in attendance, just like University of Ulster weren't here 2 weeks ago. Message us with. That's all I've written down. I think that was message us with debate suggestions for next semester. So if there's anything that comes into your head that you would like debated, any topic, even if you can't think of any particular motion, just message us or Leonard Fick or me or Owen as our internal convener. Again, just he's waving, he's tweeting. So if you have any ideas, just say to a council member, we'll write them on the spreadsheet, and the meeting will be early December to decide the motions for next semester. So if you want anything next semester, please get them in, because otherwise you can't debate it. And that's about all for now, so I would refer you to the minutes from last week's debate.
Good evening, one and all.
Hello.
That's my new catchphrase. I'm going to start doing that now. It's great. Excuse me, please, thank you. The 4th ordinary meeting of the Literary and Scientific Society took place in the Senate room on the 12th of November and was attended by 25 members. President Senate began proceedings by congratulating Andrew Hanneman and Mohammed Musa on successfully advancing to the next round. I'd like to congratulate them again now.
Well done, Willem.
The House then was moved to private members' business, where Mr. Chris Spratt raised the issue of Yale University's message to students to avoid cultural appropriation when selecting their Halloween costumes. He asked the House whether we should continue in this vein in order to ensure a safe space for students. Mr. Finn Rogers responded by stating that people shouldn't be forced to learn in an environment which felt threatening. Although his point was salient, he was fined for his use of somewhat excessive language. Fingers crossed we won't have the same again this evening. President's questions were then heard from Mr. Finn Rogers, who asked where the lecturing was. In short, people like to steal things, but we managed to get it back. Without further ado, President Senate announced the evening's motion. This House wishes Margaret Thatcher had been Prime Minister during the Second World War. Opening for the proposition, was Mr. Stephen Ivnitsky, who opened by stating that he missed the lecture, as he could have used it to protect him from the House, who were probably going to hate him by the end of the speech. Those were his words and not mine. He asserted that one person capable of taking down the Iron Curtain was the Iron Lady, and that in an ideal world we could potentially have Churchill as a president and Thatcher as a prime minister. He noted that although he helped us through, Churchill was by no means ideal, bringing up his failures such as the naval disaster in Calais. He claimed that Maggie would be more militarily frugal and decisive, reminding the House that she claimed the Falklands despite cutting defence spending. He remarked finally that Thatcher in charge in World War II may not have been allowed to happen in the first place. Opening for the opposition was Main Speaker Mr. Bradley Alsop, who claimed definitively that Thatcher wouldn't have just made things worse, but we would have lost the Second World War with her at the helm. He admitted that Thatcher did indeed reform the economy, but by far for the worse. He put forth 3 things that are needed to win a war: soldiers, weapons and morale. In terms of soldiers, Mr. Alsop claimed that Thatcher would have decimated the working class in Britain, leaving the army with a massive hole in its ranks. Of those left, the weapons they will be carrying will be substandard and few, considering that under Thatcher 1.9 million manufacturing jobs were lost in Great Britain. And finally, in terms of morale, Churchill had the winning formula in that, for all his faults, he could inspire soldiers to lay down their lives for their country. Mr. Alsop asserted to the House that Lady Thatcher's assertion that there were no such thing as society, concluding that she wasn't the leader we needed to inspire morale in our troops. Closing with the proposition was Mr. Finbar Rogers, who opened with the phrase, "Craig Miller can't afford brazzers," a line that I absolutely refuse to add any context to whatsoever. He began by reminding the House that in 1939, Thatcher would have been unsuitable for the Prime Minister position, as at the time she was 13 years old. It would be remiss of me to not point out at this moment that until 10 minutes before the start of the debate, Mr. Rogers was under the impression that he'd be speaking for the opposite side. So I will do him a favour and conclude his portion of the minutes. Concluding for the opposition and so the debate was Labour Speaker Niall Devlin, who commented that the proposition had wasted time comparing Churchill and Thatcher, as they were two completely different Prime Ministers. He asserted that Thatcher would have been completely incompatible with the unity government of the Second World War, with no previous military experience and having only ruled during peace times. He concluded by stating that Thatcher's love for the advancement of private interests would massively conflict with the national interest at the time, and a Margaret Thatcher wartime government would be a disaster. The debate then moved to the floor, where questions were heard from Ryan Neal, Jill McManus, Mo Musa, Chris Spratt, Kieran Gallagher, Rob Whitehurst, Chris Spratt and Jamie Hanna. The House was then moved to a vote based on personal opinion, which read 1 aye, 15 nays and 4 abstentions. And finally, the casting vote based on Speaker's performance was taken, Finn, cover your ears, 1 aye, 10 nays and 2 abstentions. May I take the minutes as read?
Thank you very much. So we're now going to move on to private members' business. So this portion of the evening is if anybody has anything from the news they'd like brought up, if anybody has anything that they would like to talk about within the society, any questions to other council members that aren't me. Yes?
Madam President, I'd just like to recognise... Just like, would the House like to pay a small tribute to the victims of the Paris attacks and last week's atrocities? Just to sort of note down in the minutes.
Yes, of course, yes.
Just have noted.
Our secretary will do that, I think.
I think tonight's topic is, I think that topic probably come up a lot, it's very relevant now. So just remember that freedom is always, whether we're going to debate or not tonight, it's always a value to prioritise in our society.
Thank you. Alright, yeah, secretary, I get that. Would anybody like to comment on any of that? Obviously, respectfully and...
I've just proposed a small amendment to that motion. Are we going to? Probably pretty unanimous. Just to echo that and to extend our sympathy and our recognition to all those who have died in terrorist attacks and wars around the world over the last
year.
Okay, should we vote on it? Sorry, yes.
How are you then defining what a terrorist attack is? Because if you look at what's gone on in Syria recently, Lebanon recently, it was an attack by a terrorist organisation on another terrorist organisation. So I don't think that we should ever be sort of commemorating the loss in that sort of an incident. You've basically got Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon getting attacked by ISIS. To me, that's just two baddies having a go at each other, and I will never shed a tear over that sort of stuff.
The potential category problem with the word terrorist is why I tacked on at the end, and war in general. I think we can generally be pretty, I hope, unanimous that we don't like people dying in wars, even if we may take one side or another in certain conflicts.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a comment? We'll go for Sophie first.
I don't know if anyone else has another one. So,
you can go first.
Okay, just to sort of add on to guess what Finlay said is that wherever these attacks have happened, wherever around the world, and however we feel about that, civilian people still died. And that's something that we should still feel bad about. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes?
I think you've got to look at the root cause of these problems, and if you are basically just basically shedding a tear for people that die in war, and you're not looking at why the war was there and what happened in the first place, you're actually doing everybody an injustice. And by basically just saying we're going to commiserate everybody that's died in war, to me that's basically not looking at what's actually going on in the world right now.
Okay, I'll take 2 final points. So, yes, stand up please. Yeah.
I would point out that any loss of human life is something that we should commiserate, and any victims of war are something that we should commiserate, no matter what the circumstances that are going on in the world right now. The plain fact is that somebody has died, and somebody has died needlessly, and I think we need to commemorate that.
Okay, thank you. I have one final point. Yes.
Just to elaborate on the Mrs. Jane Cunningham. Ms. Jane I think the general proposition that people have died is lamentable in itself, and we should take a moment to pause over the life that might have been had they not been so warped by their ideas. That's why I think it's a good idea to say all those who have died in war, not just either side, because frankly it depends on your position on the innate nature of evil, and that's a very Brendan Kelter's point of view. But frankly, evil manifests itself through people. People themselves are not innately evil, and we should lament the fact that they died needlessly for ideas that have worked.
Okay, thank you. So we'll put this motion to a vote with the sort of added amendments. So all those in favour that we should record a message of commemoration in the minutes? Raise your hands.
Can we just have a clarification on what the motion actually is?
And to all victims in the world who've suffered terrorist atrocities recently, who've died needlessly.
Yes, okay, so the motion is all victims of terrorist atrocities. Raise your hand and say aye, please.
Aye.
Yeah, 22. All those who say nay, sorry, should we lose this one? 1, and all those who abstain? No, okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any other private members' business? Yes, stand up please.
Yes. I think I should commend Mr. Finlay for this evening, having built his tie out of Lego.
Slowly spin.
Gives it twirl.
We will all see when he gets to speak, but
Work it, baby, work it.
Well, the tie in question that I believe my honourable friend the member refers to has on numerous occasions been dubbed my conversation tie. I'm so glad it's actually now the subject of a literarific motion. That goes further than conversation in my book, so I'm honoured.
okay, thank you. Chris,
I'd just like to
would like
add
to
an
add-
addendum.
Okay.
For conversation tie, I would please like to learn more about that at the pub.
Second.
So the motion is to commend Mr. Kelly on making his tie out of Lego.
I would just. Could we perhaps not have this in the minutes immediately after the motion we've just had?
If we could have a 5-minute break.
Okay, we'll skip the line. Yes.
This House would believe that Corbyn represents a bigger danger considering his stance on terrorism than global warming.
Okay, so we haven't actually voted on Johnny's tie yet, so we'll go back. So all those in favour,
Oh, sorry. Samples are available.
all those in
Anyone has a
favour,
purpose?
Mr. Jonathan Finlay for the tie, raise your hand and say aye, please.
Aye.
17. And all those against? The nay. 3. And all those abstain?
This is the most impassioned debate of the year.
Okay. Swiftly moving on. Last point of private members' business was that Corbyn something or other.
Corbyn's stance on terrorism represents a bigger danger to the world than global warming, as per the democratic debate.
Okay. Does anybody have a brief response on that? Yes?
Craig has just demonstrated exactly what I'm basically going to go through the entire debate. That's it.
Anyone got a brief response who's not speaking tonight? You don't have to. Yes, Chris.
I think there's definitely an argument to be made that some people don't believe in global warming at all, and therefore the motion doesn't take into account the various subjectivities that we have in the world and is therefore redundant.
Sorry. Yes. Stand up, please.
Can I just point out, people who don't believe in global warming are silly because it is science, and you cannot disagree with that. So we should not take them in consideration at all. Have that second amendment.
Okay, silly because it's science. Explainer. Okay.
Science would actually say,
Guys, please.
science would actually say that a 2 to 4 degree increase in temperature will actually have an economic benefit to the world.
That's some scientists.
Have fun. Do your hand.
We will be
A chamber pot on the table.
Then move on.
Slight interlude while May go and do something. Okay, do we
Well, I'm
have...
glad we had corn for the tie.
Would you like another response to that, or is there a motion you would like to put in place?
No.
Just a general comment?
Painful.
That's fine, okay. Does anyone else have any other private member business? Yes, Calvin.
Whilst we're there with the speakers, I'm thinking we play just a minute.
Okay, 33 times. We haven't played Just a Minute in a long time, so if you haven't, my timer's up. Can you time it, please?
Can we time?
Can you time it here? Funny, what?
Can I suggest a motion?
Pardon?
Can I suggest a motion?
Okay, so would anyone like to suggest a motion?
Can you explain what it is first for the benefit?
There might be some rationale in that.
Yes, guys, council members, please. Okay, just a minute. This is my first time doing it, okay. So the rules of Just a Minute are you have to stand up and speak for as long as possible, up to a minute, and you aren't allowed any hesitation, deviation or repetition. So if you do that, somebody will call you out on hesitation, deviation or repetition, which I've just done, and they then take the floor and speak for as long as they can, and it continues until 1 minute's up. Yeah, we'll do 1 minute. Okay, so would anybody like to suggest a motion for Just a Minute? Yes, Robin.
This house believes that Fairy Tale of New York is by far the worst Christmas song.
The door is that way.
Okay, right.
Shove it up your
Okay, so the motion is this house believes
That Fairy Tale of New York is by far the worst Christmas.
this house believes that Fairy Tale of New York is by far the worst Christmas song. Okay? So would you like to start, Robbie?
Oh, no.
Okay. Could we start the timer? Anyone like to start? No, by far the worst Christmas song. You're gonna have to start, Robbie. And cheat.
I will not cheat this time.
You're already cheating. Yeah.
I will honourably repeat myself. Fairy Tale of New York was released sometime during the 20th century as these two chaps come back in and realise they have no idea what's going on. In the meantime, I'd like to conclude my successful argument by stating that Fairy Tale of New York is by far the most overrated Christmas jingle due to a number of reasons. Number one, the pathetic use of the Pogues lead singer, I don't know who he is, that's a sign, of terrible rhetoric, the use of the word faggot. This is shameful. I believe it's just not acceptable in the 20th century. Young children are saying this. I believe it's awful.
Deviation, sir. You're just going off on a PC rant. Ladies and gentlemen, of course Fairy Tale of New York is the best Christmas song ever written because it's the most realistic jingle ever written. Most of them just go on about Santa, jolly fat red men who bring toys to children. This one tells the truth about Yuletide joy, which is faggots getting drunk.
Hold on, no. Sophie.
This house believes that in fact Fairy Tale of New York is one
Enough
of
That was just a brief interlude while we was trying to get that. So we are now going to move on, assuming there's no other private members' business, to President's questions. Anybody got private citizens' questions they would like to ask Sophie and Craig, please? Yes, Calvin.
Madam President, did you enjoy that game or just something?
I did, it was good, yeah. We'll do that again sometime. Anyone else got a question?
Madam President, as this is the last debate that I will be attending for many months, I have to go back to the stalwart of my day. And what did you have for breakfast?
I had Acapulco, which is the burrito bar in the Ashby building. It's really good, yeah.
It's better than Bougie, sorry. Is it better than Bougie?
Ooh. It's close. I like tacos, so taco salad.
On a point of clarification, since this is going into the minutes and since it has been brought up, who's Caitlin?
Oh, Caitlin's my friend.
Thank you, Madam President.
Who prefers tacos and who prefers bougie?
Okay.
Some men have got to roll burn.
That question for Madam President.
Okay, maybe private member's business next week will include that. Anyone else got a president's question they would have to ask?
Yes, Madam President. Have you enjoyed Finley's tie this evening?
I do, I love Lego. I do. It's weird, I think it's weird colouring for Lego, more like those like Mega Blocks thing. But yes, I do enjoy your tie, and I'm thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
It's good to have. Anyone else got a... Yes?
On the topic of Beijing, how do you feel about Beijing's new and improved restaurant? It's really nice.
See, I like it, but the place before that was there called Rainbow was really good. They had teapot, like Hendrick's gin teapots of like cocktails and stuff. So if Beijing has those, I'm sold. I'm just saying. If Beijing's listening, please, Hendrick's gin cocktails. Anyone else? No, grand, okay, we can finally move on to tonight's motion. So, very brief context of this motion. This motion was first debated in the Literate in 1960, I believe. So before we were disbanded by Queen's /the SU. So we sort of throwback Thursday. Sorry for saying that. Somebody here hasn't read the Facebook post today. But yeah, okay, so the motion is this House believes freedom of the press is made slaves of the public. Brief rules for tonight. There are 7-minute speeches, 6 speakers. The first and last minute are protected. After the first minute, you will hear me bang on the table and bang my hand on the table, and you will be able to ask questions. To ask questions, stand up, say on the points or on the point man, and if it's up to the speaker whether they accept or reject your question. So stand up, say if they sort of wave you down or say no, then sit down. You can have a chance to jump up again really well. Please don't ask questions sort of consecutively. Leave a period of time between the questions. And if somebody else has asked a question, please don't ask the question like right away or straight afterwards. Otherwise, you'll hear no barking from everybody. And please be polite and don't talk during other people's speeches, which I feel I have something to say now. So I would like, on that note, I would like to welcome our first speaker for this evening, Mr. Michael Beans.
Nonetheless, good evening, Madam President, the Chairperson, esteemed guests in the audience. Tonight I am tasked to expose to you a perhaps unpopular, albeit realistic arguments about something which, at first glance, is faultless and close to all of our hearts. The freedom of the press, a tenet no doubt of any great democracy and of any plural society, are principle founded in the ideas of liberty, state laissez-faire non-activism, freedom, the antithesis to totalitarian censorship, the great accountability tool against governments. This is enshrined in various forms in virtually all Western societies, and it is only totally absent in most despotic of states. Montesquieu, de Tocqueville, and Voltaire all spoke very highly of it. It seems that we already dig the premise of the freedom of speech and expression and of the press, and that we wouldn't want to part with it anytime soon. However, first glance prima facie value judgments are barely the whole story. I'm about to reveal in horribly true terms the problematic implications inherent in an unrestrained media dominated by conflicting interests and subject to arbitrary control in our society, so much more so these days when we are more dangerously exposed and impressionable as regards the digital information that we share and network every day. In short, though it makes for a noble doctrine on paper, in practice the freedom of the press is a much abused right to which far too many in our jurisdiction and further afield in the world feel they have unqualified, total entitlement to. And ironically, the so-called freedom of right has trapped us into acquiring a very directed line of thinking directed by others and manipulated our opinions on some very sensitive issues, sometimes to the detriment of some very vulnerable or disadvantaged persons or groups within our societies. A great admirable idea from the Enlightenment has mutated into a grotesque ersatz fallacy. Sensationalism, journalistic vulturism, scandal, and just plain untruths play far too big a role in today's press, especially within here in the UK, where the predominant and altogether trashy tabloid media monopolise the lion's share of daily circulation, at least in terms of newspapers. Let's take a rather recent example. As most of you have heard, the UK Labour Party recently elected a new leader. Radical, unconventional compared to cabinet ministers in Conservative governments, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn truly represents a change in tack and position for the Labour Party without a doubt. We could argue all night, I'm sure, over the merits and demerits of his political agenda and policy aspirations, but this is not the purpose of our discussion presently. I refer instead to the right-wing media's all-out character assassination and on-spot spin orchestrated on a truly... No. Orchestrated on an appalling scale depicting man, for all intents and purposes, is nothing more than a proactive critic of the current government's record as a so-called threat to national security, anti-British, a terrorist sympathiser, a dangerous Republican, as well as a shabbily dressed beatnik. Not yet. Wouldn't it decide a few choice headlines from the more insalubrious outlets in the British press to illustrate this point? The Daily Mail and the Daily Express, for example, lead this crusade against Mr. Corbyn. Prime Minister Corbyn reads one headline, and the 1,000 days of the short Britain. A fine example is scaremongering and selective presentation of completely hypothetical fact. The right-wing press seem to be very quick to declare in fairly certain terms that Mr. Corbyn is unhappy with the apparently morally right, vigilante, hang 'em high and hang 'em often approach to justice in regards to terrorism. Yes?
The left-wing press have also done the same thing with things like the first 100 days of UKIP being government and that kind of thing. So, it does kind of go both ways. Sometimes.
Yes, I don't think it goes both ways, but just as a part of an example, I'm taking the right because in my research and in my reading, the right-wing press are more dominant in certainly in the tabloid industry in the UK. There's not really a strong, staunchly left-wing media presence like there is in France, for example, with Libération and Humanité, papers like that. Here, it's much more right, sort of conservative view that dominates certainly populist press. That answers your question? Are you clear? Mr. Corbyn's recent comments about him wishing for the proper trying in international courts of terrorists and his regret for the deaths in Western nation drone strikes in the Middle East, of course, in right-wing press, wasn't focused on his respect for law, order, justice and human rights concerns, but rather more these media outlets attempted to bump up the words regrets and terrorist death in a very finite, concise sentence. You see how frighteningly easy it is to completely distort reality with a press able to do whatever it pleases in a fairly liberal media environment. The real harm seems to be that the public is imprisoned, indeed, into a misleading way of voting and to hold into account the current government, who no doubt cherish the fact that the press have granted them a convenient scapegoat in Mr. Corbyn and his contemporary counterparts in other countries, if you want to take those examples too. Just today, in fact, the Mirror inaccurately and very misleadingly published a headline, "People must be capitalised, speak English if they want to live in Britain." The article dealt with a recent Supreme Court decision on asylum-seeking relief. However, the article completely disregarded the actual legal technicalities of a very highly complex Supreme Court ruling, and in order to disparage one of their target whacking boys, of course, which is the refugee, and in general, really any foreigner, because indeed, xenophobia plays a very active role in their editorial line. Another worrying and dehumanising attribute of tabloid media worth mentioning is how they revel in and encourage brutality, lack of empathy, and aggressive militaristic mindsets. The infamous Gotcha, published by The Sun, in the wake of the sinking of Belgrano in the Atlantic, and now, more recently, in fact, got him Paris terrorist snagged by the French police. Of course, we can all take our objection with the perpetrators of such crimes being reprehensible, and that would be a totally just conclusion. But I still think that this constitutes treating human loss as a mere game or a hunt. We are being robbed of our personhood and being brainwashed into cruel and malicious attitudes towards human life. We must also recall the niceties of the actual law. The freedom of expression is a highly qualified right. Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights integrated into law by virtue of the Human Rights Act, as long as the Tories don't see fit to get rid of it. That proportionality plays a big role in deciding whether freedom of press is appropriate in certain circumstances. The interests of public safety, morals, will be considered, and therefore the law takes a very strong stance on this. Just checking time there, I forgot.
You have minus 30 seconds.
Okay, right, thank you very much. I didn't get as much to cover as I want to. To include, the press in the UK and further afield is unrestrained and is reckless and is allowed to run rampant with very sensationalist editorial lines. Celebrity culture to play into that. I'll leave it to my next speaker on the opposition to take the point off. Thank you very much.
Well, the questions at the end. And I would like to welcome our first speaker for the opposition, Ms. Cameron Sports, to continue the debate.
Good. Yeah. At some point in most of our lives, I'm sure that all of you have heard not to do something because I said so. And the reason why that demand carried so little persuasive force and why it probably didn't help you to grow as a person at the time is because you can never learn anything from that. You never had an opportunity to consider possible alternative courses of actions and to determine what was right for you as an individual. Well, that might be an acceptable course of action when you're trying to get a 6-year-old to eat their peas, but when it comes to dealing with people of relatively higher levels of cognitive functioning, and when it comes to dealing with fully fledged members of society who contribute to that society in the same way that every single other individual does, and when it comes to dealing with issues and topics and ideas that have no right or wrong answer, it becomes much more problematic. I'm going to deal essentially with 4 things in this debate, if I have time. The first is the nature of the contemporary free press, access and engagement to the media. The second is the marketplace of ideas, which everyone should be familiar with, and why freedom of the press is vital to that. Thirdly, the development of society and challenging the status quo. And fourthly, if I have time, the value to individual actors of having freedom of the press. Rebuttal will be integrated. Firstly, on the nature of the contemporary media. Firstly, I just want to deal with the issue of accessibility, because the media today does not look like the media of 50 years ago or the media even of 40 years ago. The nature of contemporary media has radically changed with the development of the internet and the development of social media practices. This makes the press much more accessible to the average person in our society. It allows for largely unlimited publication of materials by all kinds of people, and increasingly a large platform for people other than corporations. So we no longer have a single dominant voice in society taking over the press and taking publications. We have a diversity of voices and a diversity of people able to express their voices, because the press takes place not only through conventional news media outlets, but through social media and through Twitter hashtags and through sharing links to articles on various social media platforms. That means the media is accessible to everyone, and everyone is able to have a voice in that. In terms of engagement with that, it's important to note that people do engage with that material, that we don't still just go to Fox News or CNN or BBC, that we listen to the voices of small people in our society, that those voices resonate in our media access and in our access to information in the world, because we look at them on social media platforms, we spread them around. When someone sees a hashtag that appeals to them, or in fact which they highly dislike, they retweet that or they post it on their Facebook page, and that props up and it pops up again and again, and that's how those small individual voices in society can have a say. Yes?
You say how those small individual voices in society can have a say, but we have to accept the fact that the voices in the media that shout the loudest have the most money, and most of the publications that get the most what's the word?
Attention?
Visibility,
Yeah.
attention, sorry.
I got it. Okay, so 2 responses to that. Firstly, we can see that with the rise of hashtag activism, hashtivism, whatever you want to see, what I want to call it, that those individual voices actually do get as much play as conventional media forms. There is a demand within our populace for those voices, and in fact, those voices are then re-spoken in the conventional media forms, that those tweets are restated within conventional media, and the reason why conventional media and mainstream media sucks those voices in is because there is that demand for it in society. People want to feel heard, people want to be heard, and people want to listen to other people who are spouting different kinds of ideas, and to feel like those voices matter, and that's why there is so much engagement with those minority voices. I think I've largely already said that. So, as I said, not necessarily existing narratives, and people engage with things that are new, things that appeal to them, sometimes things that don't appeal to them, but the point is the things that get picked up when it comes to social media platforms and all those kinds of things are the things that matter to people, are the things that people either strongly agree with or strongly disagree with or think are really important. On to the idea of marketplace of ideas, and this is really the crux of the debate when it comes to freedom of the press, because ultimately it is a question about what is the alternative. It's a question of monopoly versus competition, because the counterfactual has to be increased government regulation of the press. There is no alternative to freedom of the press except for government regulation in this case. So that means you replace one arbitrary power over the press and the dominant narratives with another arbitrary power which applies to everyone and doesn't necessarily suck up the narratives that come from the general populace. It is much more focused on creating a mainstream narrative and is much less likely to listen to the minority voices. There are political incentives on people in government to tailor the social narratives that you have. There are more incentives on media outlets to create a scandal, which, although the proposition has a problem with that, that's actually good for us because it provides a challenge to that dominant narrative, which is constantly perpetuated by the state, and we think that's actually a good thing. We don't think it's a good thing to shut down competition. We think it's more likely to have used to challenge the status quo of freedom of the press, and that is really important, and that there is much less limits when it comes to that. Why is this diversity such a good thing? To start with, the premise here is that people aren't as stupid as the proposition team wants to make them out to be. We are not actually totally stupid or bad people. We're capable of changing, we're capable of listening to things, we're capable of engaging with material. Even if there are some people who simply want to read about how Jennifer Lopez got that butt, or how some other person lost 50 pounds or gained 50 pounds or was on some sort of special diet, those people are going to engage with that material regardless because that's what we're interested in. We're talking about people on the margins who are going to change their minds based on what's presented in the media. And it's much better for them if they're faced with competing narratives in that media rather than a single narrative like you get with government regulation. And it's actually good for them to be faced with some extreme viewpoints because that makes it much easier for them to recognise the fact that not everything that they're told is something that they should accept, to recognise the fact that some ideas they should challenge. And when we have extreme voices in the media, which is what the government would likely to shut out, it's much easier for the audience to recognise the fact that some things are wrong and that they shouldn't engage with those ideas, that some things fundamentally seem inconsistent with the way that they conceptualise of life and liberty and their own values, and then they're more likely to question the other material that they're faced with. They're more likely to question the things that seem maybe okay but maybe not okay. They're more likely to question whether we should be letting refugees into the country or not, because they're more likely to recognise the fact that the dominant narrative that has always been told to them is not necessarily the truth, and they're much more likely to question that. That makes them much better citizens in a democracy. That makes them much more likely to challenge the status quo and to enact on their own political voices and desires, and to enact on their own value as individuals, their own wants and desires, and we think that's a great thing.
Thank you very much, and can I get another round of applause for Katarina for her maiden speech? Continue for the proposition is Mr. Mohammed Musa.
Good evening, everyone. Just a quick point of rebuttal to Ms. Katarina. She talked about the lack of domination, perhaps, of your atypical top 13 newspaper circulation within the UK on social media. I've got a stat here for 77% of the standard broadsheet circulation on the online media. When you talk about shares in the UK, that percentage is actually higher. So if you're saying that the social media has opened us up, I would question that. So in a world of kind of ever-creasing corporatism, the crony capitalism link between government and business, the media kind of has a unique role in which it can, stick up for workers' rights. It can be the place to expose injustice, potential power to galvanise the people against certain interests. Since the Murdoch model of proprietors in the 1970s took hold of the British media, I believe it to be relatively uncontroversial to say that they have done the exact opposite. Since then, Mr. Murdoch's Sun, the UK's best-selling newspaper, has successfully picked who would win in every election today. It's a point of contention whether Murdoch simply picks the winners or whether he actually really does have undue influence upon our electoral system. But what is uncontroversial is that, along with Lord Lockmere and the Berkeley brothers, they have an oligopoly in the British media. A free press that conspired with Thatcher to crush the unions due to the strength of Murdoch's own printing union. A free press that lobbied Tony Blair to amend a series of communication acts to let our friend Rupert increase his foreign ownership of British media. A free press that didn't even report a banking scandal until its political editor quit
On that point,
because they were putting ads in the paper, please.
how is it better if David Cameron and people who have a direct political interest in keeping themselves in power have control over that media?
Sorry, can you just... I didn't quite catch the first part.
How is it better if David Cameron and the government
That's not my recommendation here. I will go on to explain how oligopoly works, but when you sat there and talked about competition, which is the point that I was going to bring up, you cannot talk about competition when you have three owners own 77% of the media. There is no other industry you will find that is not incredibly heavily regulated that is allowed to have that level of monopoly power. That's just pure economics. The Competition Commission would not let it happen under any other condition. The media are allowed to because they are the most successful lobby and mouthpiece for the central establishment. So, let's move on to probably the peak of the power of the media. Levison was where I think kind of it really hit home for a lot of us. It was a hacking scandal where they felt the level of their power was that they could not just hack celebrities, which is not okay, but they could go ahead and hack the relatives of dead soldiers, 7/7 survivors, and a murdered 13-year-old girl, to the extent to which that her parents for an extra few days still thought she was alive. So we're talking about kind of the trivialization and how the media has kind of a stranglehold on the public and made slaves of them. After a scandal like that, what happened? We had a short-lived bout of public outrage, an inquiry in which the results were 2 out of the dozens who engaged in this phone hacking got short sentences. And we had our friend Rupert talking about how it was the most humbling day of his life. So between Murdoch, Lord Lockmere and the Berkeley brothers to this day, they still amass 77% of the circulation of the top 13 selling newspapers. So, as I was saying, in economics, the government's role is to regulate and make markets competitive and break up monopolies. Monopolies defined as 25% of the market share, for the record. This one is untouched, and for all intents and purposes, unregulated.
On that point, sir, it doesn't sound like you're actually arguing to not have freedom of the press. It just sounds like you want to have better control over market size, which is still free press.
Look.
It's just better regulation.
Okay. Right, so I'm not arguing against freedom of press. The motion is that the freedom of the press has made slaves of the public. So if there was serious competition laws to actually break it down so then the interests of 4 billionaires who own 77% of the market share, we could break that down into kind of a realistic media who disseminate real information rather than just their views in which they are kind of a vocal point of a series of different lobbies. That's kind of what I'm arguing here. So it's all about the aspect of slaves of the public, making slaves of the public. So I will venture one line of defence for them here. They don't believe in economics, these proprietors. Perhaps the greatest trick in our living memory is that of austerity. So brilliantly performed by the media and Dave that the public is unquestioning that is the economic consensus. 80% of economists didn't agree with our austerity in 2012. And now I will challenge you to find 5 published economists who agree with it. In fact, I will pay the budget deficit myself if you can find 5 who agree with it.
Whitehurst tried this.
Okay, right. 2 of the 3 Nobel Prize winning economists in the last 15 years have estimated that the austerity policies have cost our economy between 5 and 15%. That's the economically competent Tories. Now, it's what they've most successfully done and how they really have made slaves of the public is how they've managed to turn us against some of the most important people in our society. Now, I can understand the tube workers and how they turn us against them, but they turn us against the teachers, the police. If they strike, then the whole public is against them. The one that got me was the firefighters. That's the one that I always remember. These are the people who, when your house is on fire and your family is in imminent danger, they run into your house to try and save your life. And the whole public was turned against them because they weren't happy with their terms and conditions being ripped up in front of them. Now, they've also gone after the doctors, the people who just straight out saved your lives. How did the media display this? 11% pay rise for the junior doctors, how outrageous. It was actually a 20% pay cut. This is how the media made slaves of the public. After the working tax credits have been stalled and the people have begun to get an inkling of what real austerity is going to mean, how have they reacted? Since 4% swing since the pre-election polls. Ladies and gentlemen, it's official. The turkeys have voted for fucking Christmas.
Sentiment of that last point. There is a ban against swearing.
May I know he's not being fun?
And hold on, guys. I'm going to have to fine you for the use of that expletive. So it is about support. And if you could go shopping with Finn and /5 support, I appreciate that. So on that note, remaining for the opposition is Mr. Jonathan Finlay. I'd like to take the floor.
Thank you.
Resign.
I was considering just getting my tie to do this speech because I think it's more. I think it's been more popular than me tonight. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, ladies, gentlemen, etc., and honoured guests who fall into the above category as well. This House believes freedom of the press has made slaves of the public. Now, the central point I'm going to make here is that aren't we rather underestimating the agency of the public? The ability of the public to act en masse, to have a majority opinion, and through their massive democratic and economic power acting corporately to influence the press. You'll get, I saw on the Facebook page for this event, you'll get words like sheeple bandied about. You'll hear some quite, I think, elitist language, as if people are so gullible and so stupid and such blank slates that they will walk into the news agents, see every tabloid headline shouting out at them, and think, oh yeah, that must be right. I don't think so. No, thank you. I think the press exists in a capitalist market. I think the press, like any capitalist agency, responds to demand. Let's look at, we mentioned those empires, and I'm only going to focus on the media empires because I think Katerina quite eloquently covered the new forms of journalism that are emerging. Let's look at those media empires. We had Rothermere, Murdoch, and the Barclays. Now, if they all were competing against one another, which they are, and if the way they wanted to compete was to dominate public opinion, why do they have such similar editorial lines in their papers?
On that point, sir.
Go ahead.
Surely, in rebuttal to that, you could argue the Marxist line of argument that capitalist ideals dominates the popular media nowadays, and that surely the fact that they all have that same line is because they're all in a crony system of monopolising the press, as my colleague Mr. Mohammed pointed out earlier. Would you not think that's a fair point? Or would you, would anyone respond to that?
Well, the capitalist media, of course, also might encompass Hollywood. Films like Avatar, for instance. Big budget, big hyped up movie. Absolutely disappointing, I think. But not a message, I think, that would be particularly welcome to the barons of the oil industry. They follow the demand These papers are conservative because they believe, at least, and some things, such as certain recent election results, confirm them, that there are quite a lot of conservative people in Britain. There are quite a lot of people who want to read trashy things about celebrities, who enjoy reading about migrants stealing their benefits and putting hijabs on everybody. They are responding to a demand. And you want proof of this? If you want proof of this, look at The Sun. The same paper in England and Scotland, or UK and Scotland, supports completely different parties with completely different interests. The Scottish Sun supports the SNP. That is because they could see that public opinion was swinging behind the SNP. Do you think Murdoch wants to see a breakup of the UK? Do you think that would actually help his business model if he started having to negotiate, if he started having to have influence over two governments and not just one? Go ahead.
Is the Sun in that regard not reacting in a similar way to the Catholic Church in Ireland? Seeing where public opinion is and grabbing hold of it in a way that they can control the public and lead them into their demise.
Well, the Catholic Church in Ireland isn't doing a very good job of controlling the public.
Give them time.
I think you're just illustrating my point, thank you. I mean, one of the most egregious examples of the supposed press influence over elections that gets trotted out is 1992's Conservative victory. It's the Sun what won it. So the Sun claimed. Now, are we suddenly taking the Sun's word at face value for everything? You don't think they have an interest in saying that they won it? Actually, if you look at the 1992 British election study that was carried out by a lot of very smart people in a lot of very famous universities, you'll see that the support for the Tories among readers of those papers, like The Sun, like the Daily Mail, like the Daily Express, fell as the campaign went on. Support for the Tories among readers of the Mirror and people who didn't read any papers whatsoever actually rose. We don't know why Kenneth lost that election, but I think we can be pretty sure that it wasn't. I'm sure you can tell us all later that it wasn't the Sun what won. Finally, this word slave that's in the motion. I'm not going to dwell on this point, but what is the central component of slavery? It's not necessarily forced labour, because slaves, like anyone else, have to rest. It is the inability to leave that condition. Slaves cannot stop being slaves. That's what makes them slaves. That's why most, I think, I'm not an expert in this, but most philosophers are broadly agreed that you cannot logically sell yourself into slavery. It's an absurdity. Again, the pub. And yet, what's happening to these media empires that have such sway, allegedly, over public opinion? The circulation of every single daily paper in the UK is plummeting. The press is being eclipsed by new forms of media and by people who generally don't care much about politics. Now, I think that is not an example of freedom of the press making slaves of the public. I think it's an example of a public living in a world where the press is free and the public are free to abandon it if they lose interest in it. I did have more to say, but I amazed myself at my ability to ramble. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Byron Sedler. And I would like to welcome the closing speech for the proposition from Mr. Finbar Rogers. Hold on to your hats.
I have had very little sleep, more alcohol, and not actually a speech. Anyway, some points of rebuttal. Never mind all that. The object.
I can see the motion.
The objective of the media, as moving on from sort of little joke from the first part, the objective of the media should be getting the public to eat vegetables. We don't listen to the voices of the small people in our society because the press craft the voices of the small people. and when they invent the idea of the British working class. When we refer to the press, as this motion does as well, we refer to the mainstream media rather than social media. So it's not this grassroots thing, which is either useful or not, depending on which site you inhabit. Now, second, Finlay! Finlay, if that even is your real tie. Firstly, you can't sell yourself into slavery. Have you ever met a libertarian?
No.
The problem is not that we in the proposition undermine the public, but that the press does. Have you ever seen The Sun? Have you ever seen what they assume that their readers will buy because they have plenty of experience and they know that their readers will buy it? Yes, The Sun would want it. Of course, it's The Sun would want that election, not the fact that in Sheffield, Neil Kinnock decided to channel the spirit of Elvis Presley, reminding the people that Labour hasn't been in power for 18 years and they've probably forgotten how to do it. Their target market is the residual of the species. And I refuse to believe that most people can be taken in by such god-awful puns and rampant sexism. But if they were presented with a true, unbiased and well-thought-out source of information, maybe they wouldn't be philosophers overnight, but they may develop a more reasoned view of the issues at hand, the issues of the day. Go on now. Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Surely it's impossible to have a newsfeed which is completely unbiased.
It's impossible to have a human that's completely unbiased because all humans are based on their past experiences and whatnot, but you can minimise that as much as possible, which is the object of science, history, whatever. You see, there was a time, and especially people like journalists should do that as much as possible. There was a time when the press were beholden to journalistic values and standards. But then, Thatcher came along, and we all got caught up in this perverse idea of a neoliberal fantasy where everything, every institution should run like a business. And that just isn't going to be fun or good for any of us. In the short term, it might reap a few profits, but in the long term, we're all going to die. Now, we have this you bugger presenting the electorate valuable and useful information, what their government is doing, and let's just stick Jennifer Lawrence's text on page 3, and then we'll earn a quick buck. That's what they do, not me. There is this sickening goal of appealing to the lowest common denominator of the species, rather than doing what the media should be doing, which is raising the lowest common denominator. Rather than scrutinising the government, bringing forth information which might enrich our social thinking and knowledge, papers are far more interested in appealing to their dogmatic and partisan base. What, Mr. Finlay?
So
would you like to come in a word?
You're basically conceding that you want the press to have an enormous amount of influence over people. You want it to raise them in a sort of eugenicist way.
No, I am not. No, Mr. Finlay. I get your point, Mr. Finlay. No, I am not. I think the press have too much freedom. We are not saying on the proposition we are against freedom of the press. We just think they have too much freedom. That is not a national socialist view, because too much freedom is bad for you. It makes you giddy. You brought me forward in my speech, but whatever.
On that point,
I'm still dealing with Finlay. Of course, the press should have some degree of freedom, but it should stop far short of some money-grabbing little pervert or, in short, Australian, owning multiple sources of public information and using them for their own fancy. There should be regulations placed on the press, just as there should be regulations placed on business and banks and trade unions and parties and whatever else you can name, including Finlay's tie. But far too loud.
You can talk.
I'm overcompensating.
Are you actually perhaps discussing the fact that you have potentially become a slave to the brightfulness of Finlay's tie?
Really can't control it.
That is a slavery people would accept. Roger!
Just hypnotism.
Mr. Rogers.
I think this is speech concluded for now.
No.
Please,
Yes, no. The public is totally fallen
Just
for this
describe this
flatulent display of unchecked capitalism. and any public figure that says anything against it, saying to yourself, actually, that Hitler unit undermined my right to Fabiola, by the way. You're seeing this
Please
incredible. No, fuck's sake.
Okay. On that note, I feel yes, you can. I feel that it is my place to say that all views expressed by speakers are, as always, not representative of the views by the Liturgic or the Council, or necessarily members of the House. And the swearing, please, for the love of whatever. I have a list. No, please already fine. I have a list of swear words that haven't I got a list of swear words written down here?
Tonight.
Please, I court.
I'll go with you.
Okay, and to close for the opposition tonight with a slightly more demure speech, I hope, is Mr. Andrew Hammond.
All right. Good. All right. Good night, Madam President, Honourable Chair, speakers, and all in attendance. I would like to first of all dispel the paradox that lies within the motion. Can freedom really enslave? Can an institution that serves to limit the intrusion of the state on what becomes public really enslave? I'm not convinced of this. Freedom of the press preserves the right of the populace to make an informed decision on issues that concern them, and unfortunately, on issues that do not concern them. But this is their right, nonetheless. And I'll actually use my previous colleague there, Johnny Sheep, argument to my advantage as well. Because if you think that it's human nature to unknowingly crave being herded like sheep, or believe that what they read on the Ulster Fry or what they hear on Fox News is pure fact, then possibly it is true. But even if it was, that isn't an argument for taking away or regulating these media outlets. If you aren't convinced, there are no spoof news websites in North Korea, and no one has ever heard of Fox News there. But as a matter of opinion in which I am sure you will agree, they are slightly worse off when it comes to deciphering fact and fiction. No, sorry. Yes, freedom is power. And the beautiful thing about freedom, as with any power, is that it devolves responsibility onto those who wield it, to take advantage of it. The responsibility to act and to think in an enlightened way. The responsibility to question and re-question, to reject the popular opinion or agree with it. This is the responsibility that lies with the public. If the majority allow themselves to become duped by media corporations with a hidden agenda, then there will always be those who don't. And that is why freedom of the press is so important. It allows a diversity of opinions, facts, and even half-truths.
On that point, sir?
Yes?
With that other argument, would you be suggesting that the state, in its fairly non-interventionist approach, is leaving the press to act as an agent for itself to regulate certain ideals in society, that it's basically just not bothered in itself? Or do you think that the press is doing it for some common good or some goal, or is it just sort of acquiescence, or we couldn't be bothered?
Well, the thing about it is that the press can do whatever they want, they can say whatever they want, but it's up to us to either believe it or not believe it. And if the fact that we have so many different sources because of this freedom that we have, is that we can, one media outlet may say something, but then we can go on another one, and then we may get the truth from there. But that's the whole thing about it. I mean, the whole thing about it is just having this sort of understanding that not everything you believe is that you see or hear is true. And that probably will bring me on to the next point. As with all things in life, you need to work hard for the truth. And some people do not even want the truth or can't handle the truth. So they aren't bothered to question if what they heard about Obama being the Antichrist and Trump being their savior on Fox News is correct or not.
On that point,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
most people who, when they find a news source, will assume that it was written by journalists who went through journalism school and then knows how to research properly and will write an unbiased opinion, and they will assume that is the truth. And because most people assume media in the 20-minute commute, they don't have time to go into more and more background research.
And that is their downfall, because if you don't critique everything, then you will enslave your own self, and that is becoming mentally enslaved. That's their own doing. Yeah. Because the public can they can choose which one they want without consequence from their own selves or the government. Suppose if it were the case that you were flogged or punished for having an opinion that goes against what the government has prided itself on, and this is an extreme case, like the case of Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia. That, in my opinion, is true enslavement of the population, and it's not the majority that would have much of a problem with it. As I said, it probably is human nature to be sheep. But the revolutionists and the critics are the ones that will be disenfranchised the most by such a system. And the revolutionists and the critics are the only ones who have ever made tangible and positive change. I cannot fathom how having the liberty of not being killed by your government for chastising their policies is being enslaved. An educated populace will know that the media isn't always truthful, and that whatever ideas are presented as facts may not be, and they can still be subject to debate. Yes, go ahead.
But they don't, though, do they? That's the point. And
Yeah.
that's why we're saying they're enslaved. The public are enslaved, because you're saying that the educated public would know otherwise.
Yeah.
They comprehensively don't.
No, I agree with that, but then taking away the freedom of the press isn't going to help it. Or regulating it isn't going to help it. The people need to. My whole point is that the population will have to develop to the point where they can separate fact from fiction, and that freedom of the press, altered freedom of the press, is not going to help that, because enslavement goes far beyond that. Enslavement goes into your whole life, basically. I'll get onto that as well. In countries where freedom of the press exists, but haven't attained that level of true education required for discernment, the propensity for psychological enslavement is high, and I will refrain from naming such countries. Therefore, the key to not wasting our free press liberty is to be thankful for it, but not becoming complacent about it. And that is maybe what the motion is getting at. People have been complacent for far too long in some places and have not yet attained the discernment required to relieve them from their own enslavement. But that sort of enslavement of which we speak is a staple of society in general. It isn't the fault of the media, it's our own. We love order and systems and fall into place with a particular pattern of life, and then we all meet our eventual fate of death. This is the harsh truth for many, but it doesn't have to be. And having a free press has actually been an enabler of personal freedom, since it at least gives people the option, and that is paramount to this debate. Mental enslavement is something that comes from within. Nothing or no one else can give that to you or take it away unless you want them to. A free press isn't going to take it away, neither will it enslave you if you don't allow it to. If someone is wise enough to subscribe to several journals or newspapers or read from many different sources, then they have done their best to ensure that they aren't slaves at all. But if their only subscription is to the Daily Mail, then that isn't the fault of a free press system. It's their own fault. So in conclusion, if there are people who are frustrated with how people have been duped by select media outlets, then that is a very good sign. It means the change is coming and is starting with you. And you can help enable that change by preserving press freedom and voting opposition. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Wow, it'd be interesting to see what the 1960 minutes of that debate were like. Yeah, help us. Okay, so we're going to go on to a few quick questions. We're going to keep it short, so only one response from the side that's being asked to. So if you ask a question to the proposition, only the proposition will be able to answer, and vice versa. So first of all, we're going to go to questions for the proposition, questions for the opposition, and then general sort of abstentions on the point. Please, could you stand up, say your full name, and ask your question. So first of all, to the proposition. Yes?
Okay, I'm a Fox watcher.
Really?
I also happen to.
Is that like bird watching?
I also read The Guardian on a daily basis, and on a Sunday when I have the time, I read the Telegraph. So I take the full array that's in the media, because my mum brought me up to basically say, if you've got one side of the story, you don't have half the story, you just have fiction. Without freedom of the press, tell me how you get that array of bias, and that's what it is. Every single outlet has bias. It's about knowing the bias, finding equal sides, and then basically drawing your own conclusion. Without freedom of the press, how do you get there?
Mr. Miller, I don't think I need to go into much depth on this. You are not normal. I mean that in the best possible way. You are a Queen's academic. Most people are not academics. They will not think that, oh, I should read the full range of information available to me and then come up with the best possible opinion. No, they'll just grab whatever they want to just get them through their bus journey or their train journey.
So practically redeeming something. Okay, can we have a question for the opposition to these lovely people? Yes, stand up, state name please.
Hi, my name is Jeremy, and I just have a question. There was a lot of talk about liberty, and there was a lot of talk about this idea of the need for freedom of press, freedom of speech. It's fundamental, but we're not really free in society. I mean this in a certain way. Someone's freedom to live must, of course, restrain someone else's freedom to kill. Someone's freedom to have must prevent someone's freedom to steal. And so, can we really say that freedom of the press should entail a mandate to mislead, rather than simply uphold and follow proper journalistic practices and empirical-based writing, rather than just presenting certain abstract views?
Thanks. Anyone in the opposition like to field that question?
Yes. I think that's up to the population to decide if they are going to be, they are going to basically take on board whatever is said in whatever news article that they are that they are presented with. Like, the fact is that regulation is going to be harmful, because who regulates it at the end of the day is people with power at the end of the day. So you still are in probably a worse position if you do have that sort of regulation. I hope that may have answered your question a bit. But
please, come on.
Pardon?
We don't get to answer first, right?
No, but we're going to the bar afterwards, so you can continue to chat.
Just the normal 4 words.
4 words, go for
Okay,
it.
let me think about this.
That's the whole point.
Okay, alright. Competition law disbands your freedom.
I don't know what competition law is.
25% maximum.
Per proprietor, that's how it's supposed to work.
Okay, thanks guys, please, afterwards. Okay. So, do we have a point abstaining on the motion, general point on the motion, point to both sides? Both people get the answer to this one? Yes, stand up and state your name, please.
My name's Sinead. I was just wondering if either side had any comments to make on the positives of media outlets in bringing information to the public, as in Edward Snowden, the Guardian role, WikiLeaks, all that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, anyone else?
Hello, Sinead. Yes, definitely. I think like media like that there are some positives. Definitely, WikiLeaks was a huge step in sort of diffusing a lot of information that the public wouldn't have had a lot of access to before, which they have all the right and interest to know about what their state actors and governments do in the world. But I would just like to add the caveat that in our discussion we're talking about the press as such, WikiLeaks was not quite your normal breed of press, if you like. It was a creature of its own creation by Julian Assange and by that organisation. There's nothing been ever before, there's nothing been since like that. So I would say yes, that's definitely a great innovation, but I don't think it's representative of what the average press does in the average Western society nowadays.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone from the opposition like to be corner?
Yes. Sorry, you want to go ahead?
Go for it.
No, but I think freedom of the press preserves the ability for something like WikiLeaks to actually come about and for it to be promulgated in the future. If there was no freedom of the press, that could never occur.
Can I just get a point of clarification?
Yes.
Does being free include being locked in the Ecuadorian embassy in Britain because you're not allowed to publish what you said?
Well, sorry, can you just clarify
So,
what you said again?
does your freedom of the press that you've just advocated, does that include being housed in the Ecuadorian embassy in Britain and not being allowed to leave there without being arrested? Because the person that you've just recommended, Julian Assange.
No, well, I'm not. I'm just saying that is the. That's the freedom that people have, right? And not only that the fact is that there's good and bad that will probably come from everything. I mean, there has been good that has come from it, there's bad that has come from it. The thing is that there is the ability to control our own lives from our own perspective and not from the government and so on. Like, if it wasn't for freedom of the press, then we would not have that or anything like that. You know,
freedom of the press would be arrested without the.
What's that?
WikiLeaks have an independent press.
Yeah, I know, but it's still media.
Back and forth.
It's media. Like I go on. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Okay, can we go? Yeah, okay, I'll finish on that. Can we go? Probably the final round of questions, but we'll continue because we're sort of running on a bit for time. So, question to the proposition to these lovely gentlemen.
You would.
Yes, yeah. Stand up, state your name for the minutes, please.
Owen Mulholland. So this is a question that was actually tweeted in from Sophie.
No, it was from Graham and I passed it on.
So it's for profit, directed mostly at the first speaker. So while it is true that the papers you talk about demonise Corbyn, surely there are those who vehemently support his position.
Not really.
Okay, in response to that, to my knowledge, there's only one paper, well, there's two actually I can name.
Finn, please.
Which not even like faultlessly support this record. The Independent is sort of, I wouldn't say objective, but it takes a fairly fair stance, favourable overall. The Guardian obviously being the default de facto left-wing paper in the UK, although by European standards not really that left-wing, takes a kind of sympathetic view towards Corbyn. I think too, the fact that maybe Corbyn's ideas maybe are, they've kind of just, I mean the New Labour Party before that, it was essentially just Conservative Party light, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I think the fact that he's changed okay, basically what I'm saying is, I think basically people are just, the Corbyn's ruffling people's feathers, and the right wing are reacting, they're throwing their toys at the pram basically, and the left wing are just sort of twiddling their thumbs and saying, yeah, at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a question for the opposition? These lovely people? Yes, at the back, please. Stand up, state your name.
Yes, Benjamin Murphy. Sorry. I feel like the proposition didn't adequately marry the concepts of freedom of the press and slavery. So, in my honorary Brendan Kelter's philosophically tenuous question for the opposition, I will say, in the 1800s in revolutionary France, there was a novelist and writer called Gustave Flaubert who noted that with the freedom of the press came many millions of people in the working class who he called were stupid, even though they had access to so much knowledge. They had so many opinions and so many facts to hand, and yet they were still stupid. And the fact that the problem is we still have that same issue now, where it is less a matter of convincing people of your opinion and more a matter of making it convenient and digestible and marketable that people will actually choose to accept that opinion. And I think it's kind of like, I'll parallel it with something like, say, McDonald's or fast food. It's about convenience. Most of the papers like The Sun, their readership are vastly working class, vastly less educated than everybody who reads, say, for instance, The Guardian. People who read The Guardian, for instance, would perhaps know what a logical fallacy is. With the ordinary reader of The Sun, know what a logical fallacy is, like begging the question, saying something that is technically true but actually wrong, stuff like that. I think, arguably, that convenience and making it something that people rely on for their ordinary discourse, particularly amongst the mass working class, is certainly a way that people are enslaved through the freedom. The fact that people have, the press do have a freedom, but they also have a corresponding responsibility under social contract, and they have yet to manifest any sort of commitment to that responsibility.
Further response on?
Do you have something?
So I just point out that it's not. Sorry. It's not actually freedom of the press that causes that problem. So, in fact, freedom of the press in this case will provide more diversity of narratives that people can go to for that convenience, and at least 23% of news media outlets will be providing a differing narrative, whereas the counterfactual has to be government regulating that narrative. And although we heard at first that that wasn't going to be regulating the message, at third it was very clear that that was an idea about creating a sort of objective view of the facts, when in reality that's impossible, and it's better if those people can at least reach for differing opinions, and those people in the counterfactual will be reaching for a single outlet anyway. The question is where does that come from? At least on this side of the house you have more diversity there, and that you don't put the power and the narratives in the hands of people who have a direct interest of maintaining the dominant social narrative.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll go for one final point of there's no rebuttal, no forward, no.
5 words, 6 words.
No, you're not having your 4 words. You know what that would be. Four. Go. One.
Madam Chairperson, I wouldn't give him any leeway.
Final point, abstaining on motion. Please, Finn, sit down. You can ask it more. Please. Thank you. Final point, abstaining the motion. Anyone has asked a question before? Would you like to ask a question? Yes. Stand up, state your name, please.
Yeah, Richard Gallagher. I just wanted to say that this idea that, and it seems to be everywhere at the moment, that there's no downside to free speech. Of course there's a downside to free speech. We all know it's something we've always accepted. That is a fight, and it's a fight that will always continue. There's things to fight against, like the Sun and the monopolisation of Murdoch's empire and stuff like that. There's always going to be things to fight against it, but ultimately, surely the alternative is worse. And I thought that was need to be said.
Okay, thank you. Your brief response from.
I'm not arguing against free speech here. I'm arguing for it. Okay. The problem is that the way that these markets work is, because they have more money, they keep the concentration. They are the ones who are stewarding the whole discussion, the whole Overton window. Everything is framed down this narrow channel that they allow for. I am recommending freedom of speech. I am saying that competition law should come in and break it down, so then you can have a wide disparity. You can have a UKIP newspaper that takes up 14% of all circulation. I don't care, okay? But what I'm saying is that it has to be broken down, and you cannot just have an oligopoly at the top framing all the discussion.
Okay, thank you. Final response to the opposition?
Well, this is only tangentially related, but the corollary of free speech is the freedom to hear, to hear other views. And we are talking, because the motion is this house has enslaved us all. The press has enslaved us all. We are dealing with the public as a corporate body, and they choose, I would put it to you, en masse, what they want to hear, and that is what is given to them. Okay. Because that is the demand that's being set.
Is that what they choose?
Thank you very much.
Available to them?
We're going to move the house to a vote now. So thanks very much for all your speeches and questions. So the first vote is based on your personal opinion. So the motion is: this House believes freedom of the press has made slaves of the public. So if you believe the freedom of this press has made slaves of the public, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
2, yes. And if you believe that freedom of the press has not made slaves of the public, or side of the opposition, raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
We voting?
7.
8. I don't.
Yeah. And all those who abstain on the motion? Okay, and this vote is the vote that will be cast in our minutes, and I believe the one that will be comparable to the previous debate in 1960, so it'll be interesting. So if you have a membership card, please take that out and vote with that. So all of those who think that the proposition spoke better tonight, these 3 people, please raise your hand and say aye. Just speaker ability, this based on.
Then, I would suggest you vote.
Busy. And all those who think the opposition spoke better tonight, please raise your hand. say aye, I suppose. Nay. Then. Want to say opposition? 7. And all those who abstain? Or, sorry, all those who abstain believe that they spoke equally well or equally bad. or frightened to commit to it. Yeah, 3. Okay, so I believe the proposition won that, Mr. Secretary. Yes, so can I get a round of applause for the proposition? Thank you very much. And we are going to the pub now, which is part of our upstairs. Don't mind the sign that's in front of the stairs. If you would like to sign up for a Christmas dinner, please speak to Owen, who we wave again in the purple sort of jumper. And I think that's about it for this evening. So thank you very much.
Hello, it's me again. It's been a while since we last talked, so I got your letter. I just don't think this is the right thing to do, Tabitha. We've grown further apart. You moving to Lithuania won't solve anything. Please.
Freedom can do whatever they want, but what is most progressive?